The smell of a burning engine is something you never forget. It's not like smoke from a fireplace or even a house fire. It's chemical and sharp, with something underneath it that smells almost sweet, like caramel left too long on the stove. Maya Brennan knew that smell from the garage where she'd spent her teenage years handing wrenches to her father. And the moment it hit her through the ventilation shaft of Hargrove Aerospace's private hangar at Pearson International, her stomach dropped straight to the floor. She wasn't supposed to be in the hangar at all. Maya was the overnight maintenance coordinator for the ground crew, the woman who made sure the fuel logs matched the manifests, that the cleaning staff hadn't left equipment on the tarmac, that the catering invoices were filed before the 6 a.m. shift change. She was 27 years old. She had $14,000 in credit card debt from the 2 years she'd spent supporting her younger brother through his kidney treatments. And she wore the same pair of steel-toed boots every single day because she couldn't afford another pair. She was the kind of person that executives walked past without making eye contact. But she was in the hangar because she'd noticed something on the fuel log that didn't sit right. Bay 3's pre-flight check had been signed off by a senior technician named Roland Ashby, a man with 20 years of experience and a reputation for perfectionism. But Ashby had called in sick that afternoon, and Maya had personally taken the message. Whoever had signed his name on that form, it wasn't Roland Ashby. She had gone to her supervisor, a heavyset man named Derek Price, who had told her to go home, that she was tired, that the senior engineers had already reviewed everything twice. So she'd gone to the hangar herself. The Hargrove G9 in Bay 3 was the most expensive private aircraft in the building. $70 million of gleaming white composite and titanium, with a tail fin bearing the gold crest of the Hargrove Group. It was scheduled to depart at 4 a.m., carrying Aldous Hargrove, the 73-year-old patriarch of one of Canada's largest private holding companies, and his 8-year-old granddaughter, Bia. The little girl had been in and out of the hangar for the past week, trailing after her grandfather like a shadow, asking the ground crew what every single button and valve did. Maya had spent 20 minutes one afternoon explaining the difference between hydraulic fluid and fuel to a child who was allegedly doing a school project on aviation. Bia had taken notes in a purple notebook with a unicorn on the cover. Maya had thought about that notebook when she'd seen the fuel log discrepancy. She was standing near the starboard engine housing now, her flashlight moving over the external casing, when she smelled it. She pressed her palm flat against the lower cowling panel, the one closest to the ground. It was warm, not engine warm, something is wrong warm. She unclipped her flashlight and directed the beam into the gap between the cowling panel and the main housing. The internal hydraulic line had been replaced. She could see it. The new section of tubing was a slightly different shade than the surrounding system, the fittings marginally different in diameter. To anyone doing a visual scan from the normal inspection angle, it would have looked fine. It was the kind of switch you'd only catch if you were lying on the ground looking upward with a flashlight and you'd grown up watching your father repair aircraft components in a garage in Barrie, Ontario. The replacement tubing was industrial grade. It was not aviation certified. Under pressure at altitude, the fittings would fail. Maya stood up. Her legs were steady, but her hands were not. She pulled out her phone and called Derek Price. He didn't answer. She called the night supervisor, voicemail. She called the airport authority emergency line, and the automated system put her on hold. The hangar door opened behind her. Maya turned. 2 men in ground crew uniforms walked in, but they were moving wrong. Moving like men who knew exactly where they were going and didn't want to be seen getting there. One of them had a radio that wasn't standard issue. They hadn't noticed her yet. She was small and she was wearing dark coveralls, and she was standing in the shadow of the starboard engine. She didn't wait to find out what they were there to do. She walked, not ran. Walking was invisible, running was a target, back along the length of the fuselage, pushed through the fire exit at the tail end of the hangar, and came out onto the tarmac into a cold October night that smelled like jet fuel and the first threat of snow. The Hargrove family jet was departing in 4 hours. She had to get to someone who could stop it. The private terminal at Tiskinson had a separate entrance for VIP clients, and it was guarded by 3 of the most expressionless security personnel Maya had ever encountered. She told the woman at the desk that she needed to speak with whoever was in charge of the Hargrove party's security. The woman looked at Maya, at her coveralls, at her work boots, at the grease under her fingernails that she hadn't had time to clean, and asked her to wait. She waited for 11 minutes. Then a door opened and a man came out who filled the doorframe so completely that for a moment Maya thought it was the door itself moving. He was in his mid-30s, dark-haired, in a charcoal suit that looked like it had been sewn onto his body. He had the kind of jaw that cartoonists would use to draw a very serious person, and his eyes were the deep greenish-grey of Lake Ontario in November. He looked at Maya with the particular expression of a man who was very busy and had been interrupted for something he assumed was going to be a waste of his time. "I'm told you have a concern about the aircraft," he said. His voice was low and had the flatness of someone who'd had to be calm in rooms where other people were not. "Your hydraulic system has been sabotaged," Maya said. She didn't say hello, she didn't apologize for her appearance. She had exactly as much time as she had, and she knew it. Bay 3, starboard engine. The internal hydraulic line on the lower cowling has been replaced with non-certified industrial tubing. The fittings are the wrong gauge. They will fail at cruising altitude. He looked at her for 3 full seconds. "Who are you, Maya Brennan?" "I'm the overnight maintenance coordinator for the ground crew. I noticed a discrepancy in the fuel log, a forged sign-off, and I went to check the aircraft myself. That's when I found it." She held his gaze. "There were also 2 men in the hangar just now who weren't supposed to be there. I couldn't get a clear look at their faces." He turned to the security woman at the desk. "Get Marchetti on the radio now." He looked back at Maya. "Show me." "Mister," she realized she didn't know his name. "Carver," he said. "Raid Carver. I run security for Hargrove Group." He was already moving toward the door. "Come with me." They went back to the hangar. Maya led him to the starboard engine and pointed out exactly what she'd found. Reed Carver crouched down in his expensive suit without hesitation and looked at the tubing with a flashlight of his own. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he stood, and whatever had been skeptical in his expression was gone. "The 2 men," he said. "Which direction did they come from when they entered?" "East entrance, by the fuel monitoring station." He pressed 2 fingers to his ear. "Marchetti, lock down Bay 3. No one in or out. Wake Aldous and tell him wheels up is postponed, code Meridian. And find Derek Price." He looked at Maya, who was standing with her flashlight still in her hand, still trying to process the fact that someone had apparently attempted to bring down a passenger aircraft carrying an elderly man and an 8-year-old girl. "You said your supervisor didn't answer when you called," Reed said. "How long ago was that? 22 minutes? His jaw tightened. He touched his earpiece again. "Find Price too." Maya stood very still. She was beginning to understand that she had walked into something considerably larger than a paperwork discrepancy. "Reed, you all right?" "I'm fine," she said. Which was true in the sense that her body was functioning normally and not true in any other sense. "You did the right thing," he said. It wasn't the way people said it when they were trying to be reassuring. It was the way someone said it when it was simply a fact. They were noting B, Maya said. "The little girl. Is she?" "She's with Aldous in the VIP lounge. She's fine. A beat. She's been asking to watch the planes take off. We've been running out of excuses." Maya thought of the purple notebook. In the next hour, the hangar became something that looked like a controlled emergency. Reed's team moved through Bay 3 with a thoroughness that went well beyond what any airport authority team could have managed at 1 a.m. The replacement tubing was photographed, documented, and removed. A certified aviation engineer was on site within 40 minutes. Maya had no idea how that was possible, but she had stopped being surprised by what Reed Carver could apparently arrange on short notice. The 2 men from the hangar were found at the east perimeter fence. They had RCMP waiting for them. Derek Price was found in the parking structure. He was unharmed, zip-tied to a support column, unconscious from a sedative he'd been given in his coffee. He had not, it turned out, told Maya to go home because he was dismissive of her. He'd told her to go home because someone had come to his office and told him that if he let any of the night staff near Bay 3, his daughter in Mississauga would have an unfortunate evening. He'd been trying to protect her and hadn't known how to say so. He cried when Reed's team found him. Maya stood in the corridor outside the VIP lounge where Aldous Hargrove was receiving the news that someone had attempted to kill him. And she thought about all the different kinds of fear there were and how this particular night had introduced her to several new ones she hadn't previously known existed. The door opened. Aldous Hargrove was not what Maya had expected. She'd seen him at a distance during his visits to the hangar. A small, trim man with white hair and the upright posture of someone who'd been told to stand straight for long enough that it became permanent. In person, he was sharper. His eyes were pale blue and very direct. "It's Miss Brennan," he said. "Mr. Hargrove." He looked at her for a long moment in the same way Reed had looked at her in the terminal, the way people looked at things they were trying to understand accurately. "I'm told you went to that aircraft alone in the middle of the night because a signature didn't match. The log was forged," Maya said. "I knew it because I'd taken Mr. Ashby's sick call myself, and when your supervisor dismissed you, I still knew the log was forged." Aldous was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My granddaughter was going to be on that plane." "I know," Maya said. "She told me she was going to sit by the window and count the lakes." Something shifted in his face. He turned to Reed, who was standing 2 steps behind him. "Reid, sir, she doesn't go back to the night shift." Maya opened her mouth. "Mr. Hargrove, I appreciate that, but I need my job. The job I currently have." "I have." She stopped herself from saying the full amount of the debt because she wasn't sure why she'd started that sentence. "I have obligations. Financial ones. I'm not dismissing you," Aldous said. He sounded slightly puzzled, as though he'd expected her to understand. "I'm telling you that you don't go back to the night shift because you won't be in the night shift anymore, Reed." He looked at his head of security. "She found the thing your entire security apparatus missed." Reid did not look embarrassed exactly. He looked like a man who had already been having this same internal conversation for the past 40 minutes. "I know," he said. "She's on your team as of this morning," Aldous said, and walked back into the lounge. The door closed. Maya looked at Reed. Reed looked at Maya. She started. "Yes," Reed said. "I don't have a security clearance. We'll get you one. I'm a maintenance coordinator. You're the person who noticed what my team didn't," Reed said. "And you went and checked it yourself instead of going home and hoping someone else would handle it." He held her gaze. "That's the only qualification I actually care about." Maya stood in the corridor of a private terminal at 2:30 in the morning, in her steel-toed boots with her $14,000 of debt, and the smell of hydraulic fluid still on her hands. And she thought that her life had just changed so abruptly that she wasn't sure which direction was forward anymore. She went home at dawn and slept for 5 hours. She came back at noon and started learning what Reed Carver needed her to learn. The first 3 weeks were a steep climb. Maya was not trained in security operations. She'd never done a threat assessment, never run a counter-surveillance protocol, never sat in a room with 3 former CSIS officers and a retired RCMP superintendent and been expected to have opinions. She made mistakes. She used the wrong terminology. She asked questions that made the other team members glance at each other in a way that said they were wondering what she was doing there. Reed never made that face. He was demanding. He expected her to read everything he gave her and remember it, to notice things that other people didn't, to think about discrepancies in patterns and ask why before she dismissed them as coincidence. But he never treated her like a curiosity or an experiment. He treated her like someone he was waiting to catch up. She caught up. 6 weeks in, she flagged an anomaly in the Hargrove Estate's delivery logs, a catering supply company that had started varying its delivery windows in a pattern that correlated, suspiciously, with the days when Aldous had scheduled external meetings. She mentioned it to Reed at 7 in the morning in the security office. He went still in the way. He went still when something was registering as significant. He pulled the logs. He ran the correlation. The catering company had been acquired 18 months ago by a holding subsidiary that traced back to a man named Jeffrey Alderman, a former Hargrove board member, who had been voted out 3 years prior after a fraud investigation that hadn't been able to secure a prosecution. He had apparently not forgiven the family for that. "How did you see it?" Reed asked her. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at her. "The window variation," she said. "It's too precise to be scheduling. Real scheduling problems are random. That pattern isn't random." He held her gaze for a beat longer than necessary. Then he nodded and picked up his phone. The catering company's access was revoked. Alderman was flagged to the relevant authorities. The delivery drivers, 2 of whom were later found to be on Alderman's private payroll, lost their credentials. That evening, when the rest of the team had gone, Reed found Maya in the security office going over the updated access logs. He set a coffee on the desk beside her. "Good work today," he said. "The catering thing was obvious once you saw the pattern. It wasn't obvious to anyone else." He sat in the chair across from her. He had taken off his jacket, which was the only concession to informality she'd seen from him, and she could see the outline of the shoulder holster beneath his dress shirt. "Why do you stay late?" he asked. "You could go home." Maya looked at the logs. "My brother has dialysis 3 mornings a week," she said. "I drive him. If I go home in the evening, I just sit there thinking about the things I haven't finished." She paused. "I don't know how to stop working when there's still work." "Neither do I," Reed said. He said it quietly, like it was something he hadn't said out loud before. She looked at him. He was looking at the window where the Toronto skyline was showing its first grey light of early evening, and for a moment she saw what was underneath the relentless competence, something tired and careful and very alone. She didn't say anything. She went back to the logs. He stayed for another 2 hours. The threat came from somewhere she hadn't anticipated, as the worst things usually do. It was a Tuesday in February, cold enough that the puddles on Front Street had frozen into small mirrors by morning, when Aldis's granddaughter Bia was taken from her school. Not grabbed from the street, not snatched dramatically, taken with paperwork. Someone had presented themselves at the school's front office with a signed and notarized form from a woman claiming to be Bay's maternal aunt, with a custody modification document that looked entirely legitimate. The school had called the number listed for confirmation. The number was answered. The person on the other end confirmed the story. The school had released Bia to a woman she had never met. Maya was in the security office when the alert came in, and she felt the bottom drop out of the room. Reed was on his feet before she'd finished reading the message. His face had gone to the particular blankness that she'd come to understand meant he was running through options faster than the rest of the room could track. He was already on the phone. "She left the school 4 minutes ago," he said. "The vehicle is a dark blue Chrysler Pacifica. Plate was reported stolen this morning in Vaughan." He looked at Maya. "Alderman's people don't have the sophistication for this. Someone else is involved." Maya was already at the secondary monitor pulling up the transit camera feeds for the blocks around the school. She wasn't a trained surveillance analyst, but she had a particular kind of attention. The same attention that had caught the tubing in Bay 3, the same attention that had caught the delivery pattern. And she used it now, moving through the feeds frame by frame, looking for the thing that was slightly wrong. She found it in 6 minutes. "There," she said. "The Pacifica didn't go south toward the expressway. It went north, then turned onto a service road behind the metro depot on Western." She looked at Reed. "There's an industrial storage unit complex there. Hargrove Group sold a property in that block 2 years ago. Raid was already on his radio. Marchetti Western Road, the storage unit's behind the metro depot." "Move to Maya," he said. "Stay here." She looked at him. "I mean it," he said. "This is not the hangar. If this goes wrong." "I know," she said. "I'm staying." He held her gaze for 1 second. Then he was gone. She sat with the transit feeds and the radio, and she didn't move for 31 minutes. She tracked his team's movements on the internal GPS, watched the signals converge on the storage complex, and sat very still while her heart did things she didn't tell anyone about later. The radio crackled. "We have her," Reed's voice said. "She's fine. She's asking if someone can call her grandfather." Maya put her head down on the desk and let out a breath that felt like it had been compressed in her chest since February. They brought Bia back to the Hargrove estate on the north shore of Lake Ontario as the sun was going down, and the first thing the little girl did when she walked through the door was ask where her purple notebook was, because she'd been keeping a record of what had happened and wanted to make sure she had all the details right. She was 8 years old. Aldous gathered her into his arms in the front hall and didn't let go for a long time, and Maya stood near the door and watched a very powerful man be simply a grandfather for a few minutes. Then Aldous looked up and found Maya across the room. The woman who had been posing as Bay's aunt turned out to be a hired intermediary with no direct connection to anything. But the documentation, the forged forms, the notarized papers, the person who'd answered the phone, traced back to a small firm that had been retained by a man named Preston Alderman, Jeffrey's younger brother, who had been quietly leveraging his brother's grudge for his own financial benefit and had arranged the kidnapping as a pressure tactic in a hostile acquisition attempt against one of Hargrove's subsidiaries. He had assumed Aldous wouldn't call the police, because Aldous had a history of handling things privately. He had not accounted for the fact that Aldous now had Reed Carver handling things instead. Preston Alderman was arrested that night. It was Reed who told Maya, at 11 o'clock, in the security office, that had become something like a home to her over the past months. He sat across from her the way he had on the night of the catering logs, and he told her the outline of what the investigation had confirmed, and then he was quiet for a moment. "You found the storage units," he said. "The camera feeds were just a grid. I've been looking at grids my whole life, Maya." She looked at him. He almost never used her first name. "You've changed how this operation runs," he said. "Not just tonight. You see things differently. You ask the right questions." He paused, and she had the impression that what he said next had been considered carefully. "I don't know how to work without you anymore. I don't think I want to." The room was very quiet. Through the window, the lake was dark and distant, and the lights of the city were reflected in small broken pieces across the water. She held his gaze for a long moment. "That's 2 things," she said carefully. "The operational one and the other one." "Yes," Reed said. He didn't look away. "Both." She thought about the previous 4 months, the early mornings and late evenings. The coffee on the desk without being asked. The way he'd said, "Neither do I like," he was relieved to finally say it out loud. The way he'd looked at her in the hangar when she'd told him about the hydraulic line, not like she was an inconvenience, but like she was the solution to a problem he hadn't known he had. "My brother has 3 years of treatment left," she said. "Maybe more, I know. I'm not going to be someone who sits at home waiting. I wouldn't be able to find someone to replace you anyway," Reed said. There was something in the corner of his mouth that wasn't quite a smile, but was working toward one. I did try. During the first week, before I stopped bothering. She looked at him for another moment. Then she said, "The debt is almost paid down, actually. I did the numbers last month." It wasn't really an answer. They both knew it wasn't really an answer, but they both also knew what it meant. She stayed that night, working through the logs until midnight, and when she left, he walked her to her car. And when she said goodnight, he said goodnight. And when she drove home along the lake road, she was already thinking about what she'd missed in the access records from the previous week. She was also thinking about the way he'd said both. The spring came early that year. By April, the cherry trees along the Hargrove Estates Drive were blooming, and Bayer was attempting to teach the security team's German shepherd a trick that involved jumping through a hoop made of PVC piping she'd assembled herself. The dog was indulging her. The security team was pretending not to watch. Aldous had promoted Maya formally in March, giving her an official title, Director of Risk Intelligence, which she thought sounded somewhat more elevated than a woman in steel-toed boots who read fuel logs at 1 a.m. Probably warranted, but she'd accepted it because Aldous had said it with the same tone he used when things were simply being stated accurately, and there was no point in arguing. She'd paid off the last of the debt in April. She'd called her brother from the parking lot of the bank, and he'd laughed and told her she was the most stubborn person he knew. And she'd told him he was welcome, and they'd both pretended they weren't slightly tearful about it. Reed had been standing near the window of the security office when she'd come back. He'd looked at her face and known. He'd said nothing. He'd handed her a coffee. She'd taken it and sat down at her desk and felt, for the first time in 2 years, like the floor was solid beneath her feet. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday in May, he had asked her to come with him to the dock. The estate had a private dock on the lake, and on that particular morning, the water was flat and pale, and the early light was doing something remarkable with the surface, turning it the color of hammered silver. He'd been holding 2 paper cups from the Tim Hortons on Lakeshore because he knew she didn't trust the estate's espresso machine, which he found peculiar and she found pragmatic. He'd told her things she'd already suspected but needed to hear said plainly, that he wasn't someone who had found it easy to trust people, that this work had made that worse, not better, that he'd spent years being very good at maintaining a precise and managed distance from everyone in his life, that she had, without appearing to try, simply declined to respect that distance, that he hadn't wanted her to. She'd told him things she hadn't planned to say, about the years of holding everything together by herself, about what it had cost her, and what it had done to the way she thought about, depending on anyone, about the particular loneliness of being the person who always knew what needed doing, and did it because no one else was going to. He'd listened to all of it. He was very good at listening. It was one of the things she'd noticed earliest about him. When she'd finished, he'd said quietly that she didn't have to do that alone anymore if she didn't want to. She'd looked at the lake for a long moment. Then she'd looked at him. "I need to still be the person who checks the fuel logs," she said. "That's the part I'm not willing to lose," he said. "That's why I'm asking." She took her coffee from him and looked at the water. "Okay," she said. He reached out and touched the back of her hand briefly, just for a moment, with the same steadiness he brought to everything. They stood at the dock until the light changed. A year later, on a Thursday in April, Bea sat on the terrace with her latest notebook. Green this time, with a fox on the cover, and narrated what she was observing to anyone who would listen. Below on the lawn, Reed was attempting to explain to her grandfather why the perimeter cameras needed an upgrade, and Aldous was asking questions that were very precise and slightly inconvenient. Maya was sitting in a chair nearby, going through a briefing document, occasionally providing Aldous with the specific figure he needed to win the point he was making to Reed. Reed glanced over at her. She didn't look up from the document, but the corner of her mouth moved. Bea wrote in her notebook, Maya looked like she was winning even when she was pretending to read. She showed it to Maya later. Maya read it twice, then she told Bea it was a very good observation and that she should keep writing. Bea asked if Maya had always known she was going to be important to the family. Maya thought about a cold October night and a fuel log with a forged signature and the smell of a burning engine that she'd learned to recognize in her father's garage in Barrie when she was 12 years old. "No," she said honestly. "I just knew the log was wrong." Bea considered this with the gravity of an 8-year-old processing a significant idea. "That's the same thing," Bea said, and went back to her notebook. Maya looked at the lake. She supposed it was.